Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Binkhorsts and Blockbusters, a brother-sister podcast about movies and television. I'm Garrett,
And I'm Kate.
and today we're talking about the 1980 film The Shining.
Yeah, real masterpiece done by, I would say, our favorite director.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, yeah. He has done definitely some of my favorite, and I mean, they're all artsy movies, but they are very much in my top 10. I love this movie. Clockwork Orange will always be one of my favorite movies, and 2001: Space Odyssey, heck, Full Metal Jacket, amazing film. I mean, these are all films we're going to talk about at some point on the podcast, but we're starting off with The Shining
Yeah,
for Spookytober.
a nice film to really round out the Halloween month before we get into the terrible winter that global
Yeah.
warming is going to cause.
Yep. Yeah, and it is late October in Philadelphia and 75 degrees. So it's quite different from the years we spent growing up in Ohio, putting on our winter coats underneath our Halloween costumes. So
Yeah, much different. Apparently, out here in Washington, we're not supposed to get much snow this year, but who knows?
yeah, I'm not sure I believe any of the no snow, lots of snow hype. But we'll see. Philly hasn't gotten snow in 2 years, so it wouldn't upset me if we got a little, but I also don't want a blizzard, so there's that.
Yeah, I don't want to see the exactly two snow plows that Seattle has.
Yeah, and I also don't, really want to be trapped in a haunted apartment building either. So,
Yeah,
which I think would be better than a hotel, but not by much.
I'd rather have the hotel. There'd be more places to go crazy at.
That is true. More excitement, really.
Yeah.
Variety, spice of life.
But before we talk about The Shining, what's on TV?
Yeah, so this weekend I finally caught up on the new season of Good Omens. I definitely really enjoyed the first season when it came out during early pandemic or before the pandemic.
I think this was pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, I might have watched it during the pandemic, but it might have been before that. Really enjoyed this. Both seasons are good. First season's great. Second season's very fluffy. But it's fun, it's lighthearted, and very irreverent. It pokes fun at Catholicism and biblical themes really well in a really sweet and new way. The main characters are great. You'll love them when you watch it, and acting's good, effects are good, writing's good. It follows the book very closely. So, if you're into, books to TV kind of situations, it's really fun. I kind of struggled with reading the book because it is so close that you're like, oh, that's exactly what happened in the show. But I mean, for some people who like books, then, that's good.
I'd like to clue in our viewers that it took my sister a hot minute to realize she watched this show this weekend.
I mean, to be fair, I haven't been feeling well, and there are only like 5 episodes, I think. So
Oh, that's
like,
short.
right, yeah, it wasn't like I spent 20 hours watching the show and then forgot about it. It was more like 5.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, But I do really enjoy. So as a atheist who is also an art history person and a medieval, obsessed person, I probably know more about the Bible stories and saints and all of their iconography than most people. And I've always really enjoyed the way that this book has, or this series has handled different like fun events, both in history and the Bible and that kind of stuff, and looking at it at, like a very different perspective. And it's really fun. If you're super religious, you might not like this at all. So I'm sorry.
I don't think anyone in our audience is going to be super religious.
You never know. You never know. I mean, our Aunt Jerry is a reverend now, so you never
Ah,
know.
congratulations.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think she likes this show. So
Yeah.
so maybe this will get her to watch season 2 if she hasn't already.
Yeah, it's fun. It's not a heavy show at all, which was really nice, and that's what I was looking for this weekend. I know we're going to talk about later on the show that you watched, and I
Uh,
was just like, "Oh, that's too heavy
yeah.
for me."
Yeah, and that's not even the heaviest show I've watched this week, but I'm gonna wait till I finish that one before we talk about it.
Ooh, you didn't even tell me what it is. Secrets, secrets.
Do you have anything more to add on Good Omens?
Nope, that's it. Good Omens, go watch it. It's good fun. It's on Amazon.
Great. So we've talked about the Continental every week because it's been airing, and it's finally finished. And the third episode is, the big confrontation between our protagonist and Mel Gibson. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. Made me go back and watch some of the earlier John Wick movies, despite the fact they had ads during them on Peacock, which was incredibly frustrating to see.
Oh, that's annoying. How is the sound balancing on the ads?
Awful. Some of them were
Great.
silent, and others of them were like guns going off in your ear. But that is all advertisements on anything.
Yeah, see, and that's my thing. Like, if the advertisement, if I can like just kind of like tune it out mentally, and it's not, 10 decibels above the volume of everything else, I don't necessarily mind it that much. And as we've discussed, I enjoy advertisements for other television programs on the networks that I'm watching them, or even other networks. Like, give me all the trailers. I want to see them.
Yeah, I like movie
Um,
trailers.
yeah, movie trailers and television advertisements and even sports. I'll even take sports advertisements. Just like, don't try and sell me God knows what. I don't want it. I'm
Uh,
a poor millennial.
so what did you think of the finale?
It was decent. I watched it a while ago now, and I mean, it was kind of like a fun little heist thing that came together, and I mean that was fun. I did think that, and this is a spoiler, so you can skip ahead if you don't want any spoilers for the Continental. But they did a really decent job with the mask reveal in that final scene,
Oh
which
yeah,
is something that like masks. I think that we need to figure out how to use them properly, and that was a proper use of a mask.
yeah, because there was what I think in the second episode, like somebody sees it, but it's not on camera, and the only thing on camera is their reaction, and it's just like, well, that like set us up to be like fearful.
Hmm.
And then seeing it, it's like, okay, I understand why people were intimidated by this character.
Yeah. Yeah, and saving it for the very end, which is kind of the opposite of my feelings about a similar mask situation in Wheel of Time, where I think they took the mask off too early and then she never put it back on, which led me to be confused about who she was. And, like, put the mask back on. The mask is cool. Masks are cool. We like masks. I don't need to see the actor's face. I don't need to read lips. Put the subtitles on the screen. It's cool. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
that's my 2 cents.
it's interesting that we've seen a lot of like stars wearing masks and helmets in media recently, and then like as soon as they take them off, it's just kind of underwhelming. Um, like
Well, and they never put the mask back on again. And I
or
think that that's one of the things like with the
yeah,
Mandalorian. Like
yes.
you have the face reveal, but then you put the mask back on. At the same time, Bo-Katan, she takes the mask off and never puts it back on again. So like, just keep the mask. I like the mask. Masks
Look,
are cool.
if you're gonna wear armor as a helmet, you should wear the helmet during conflict. Just keep it on.
I do think that is good advice. I think that there are many a Star Wars character who could use that advice in perpetuity.
I mean, even though I can't think of a single Star Wars character that just gets shot in the face, but whatever.
Um, yeah, and there's no like weird lore about some kind of force field that they put on their faces either.
No, this isn't Dune.
No. Dune.
Speaking of Dune, we would have been watching it this week had none of the strikes gone on.
Garrett, don't pierce my heart as such.
I'm sorry, I had to do it.
It didn't come out until it would have been November 4th. So I mean, or 2nd, I don't know. That next week. So yeah, we would have had another week to mourn my future Dune-ness.
We would have been preparing. We would have been, up at the ticket releases on Tuesday night and, getting the prime seats. It would have been a thing. We would have had costumes and face paint and
I didn't think about that. I have to start getting so I was actually planning a Bene Gesserit Halloween costume, and then like I never ended up going to any Halloween parties due to just me being like overwhelmed with scheduling. I mean, clearly I could barely remember that I watched 5 episodes of a TV show this weekend. But I do think that I should make a bizarre Bene Gesserit Halloween or Dune costume to go see it in theaters.
See, now I'm bald. I can just shave the rest of my facial hair and be a Harkonnen.
You can, but should you?
Yeah, should I really shave my eyebrows for a bit? Now that is a question.
You could also be Gurney Halleck.
I don't. Okay.
You could get a bagpipe, or no, he played a like a little guitar.
I
Get a
don't.
medieval guitar.
Now, if we're talking about physique, I am much.
You're tall.
I am much closer to the Baron Harkonnen than I am to Josh Brolin.
No, I mean, I think I'm still like stuck on the version of Gurney Halleck that was in the audiobook that I read, where he just didn't sound like, that strong or like impressive. Like not he and importantly, he's not Duncan Idaho.
This is true.
So, I'm not saying for you to get a wig and a spray tan and go be Duncan Idaho either.
No, I would never do such a thing.
You could be Pitter, that'd be fun.
I do like that actor. He does really good work in some of David Lynch's content. I don't think he's in David Lynch's Dune.
I don't know. Don't be Pitter from David Lynch's Dune, please, Garrett. That would horrify me to no end.
That would be awful. Yeah, no, that's like an insane person's costume. I'm not doing that.
You also could just dress up as Lawrence of Arabia.
I don't think now is the right time to start appropriating things from that culture.
Lawrence of Arabia was a British man.
Yes. I don't think he's really who we need to be emulating right now.
Okay, I guess. I mean, I have lots of Dune related thoughts in how we can use Dune to approach the current conflicts in the Middle East, but this is not a podcast about the news. This is about movies and television.
Yes. So another television show that I've been watching was the Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix. This is a new show by Mike Flanagan. You'll know him as making The Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, and The Midnight Club. That was the one he came out last year. I think you watched it, about the children telling scary stories.
Yeah, I've watched all 4 and really enjoyed all of them. Yeah. I just recently rewatched Bly Manor, actually.
Oh, nice. So, fun fact, he also directed the sequel to The Shining, which we're talking about today, and it's a film adaptation of the sequel to the book called Doctor Sleep.
Oh.
I went and saw it, and I remember it being pretty good. I don't know how it would hold up again, but I enjoyed it. It's weird having a sequel to something that's a sequel to the movie and the book, despite there being some pretty stark differences between the two. Um, but whatever. So The Fall of the House of Usher is an adaptation of a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe stories. Um, Sometimes I think it's a bit loose how they're adapting it and what they're doing. They're taking a lot of like themes and ideas and then naming every episode basically after a short story and like trying to contain it in there as this family, the Usher family, like their legacy falls apart. Um, it's full of great actors and performances. I think it's very well edited for the 8 episodes that it is. They do a good job of giving every actor like basically an episode to tell their story and how they're important in their downfall. Um, it's really good, but I do think it's one of those that, as you think about it, like some of the things I don't think make a lot of sense. But when you binge watch a show like I did, it's hard for it to, uh, be able to like think on it and maybe I missed something. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I liked this uh, more than Blind Manor. I'd put it on the same level as Midnight Mass in my enjoyment, but the Haunting of Hill House I think is peak in his line of spooky shows.
Mm. So, would you recommend not binging it and doing it more on a one episode of a day kind of a rotation or
Maybe a couple episodes at a time. I watched I think 4 or 5 of them and then watched the next half the next day. Um, there's a lot of like foreshadowing and a lot of like back and forth scenes that I think benefit from giving it time to breathe. But being that I was familiar with a lot of the stories that it was retelling, there wasn't a lot that really surprised me. Um, there was one like scare, I guess, that they were like building up to, and it was one that I was like, well, I do not want to see this, pull the covers over your eyes, and then they just do it off screen, and I was very happy about that because it's not something I think I could have watched. Um,
yeah, I really enjoy that kind of a jump scare kind of a thing because I think that it's better just cinematically and also for like, my sanity.
yeah, because we've talked about it before in other movies of like you having to think how it happened is often a lot worse than like seeing it happen. Like
Oh yeah.
we talked about that a lot with Jaws.
Hmm.
Um, but putting the horror in your own imagination is a powerful tool.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear this review. I'm excited to watch it. I do think it, sounds like it'll take more brain power. Did you ever watch the one that came out last year, The Cabinet of Curiosities?
No, I did not. That's Del Toro, right?
Right, yeah. That is also on my list of something I have been meaning to watch, but I also live alone and sometimes as a woman, watching scary things when you live alone is a little rough.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that too. A lot of these horror films put me on edge and like kind of trigger those like really paranoid parts of my brain. Um,
Mhm.
Especially like very irrational things, but I think that's something we've talked about, but we'll talk about that more with this film with like the ghosts and the scary children and stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So
so are we ready to get into our main event?
yes. So The Shining is a movie directed by Stanley Kubrick. It stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers and Danny Lloyd. It is based on a Stephen King story, same name, released in 1977. This was Stephen King's third book after Carrie and Salem's Lot. So like he was on his rise to a lot of fame here. This is also the last story before he started writing under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman, which he wrote as a test to see if like he was actually writing good books or people just liked his name on books, so they would read them and say good things.
Yeah, so did he find out that he was actually a good writer?
Yes, because all of the stories by Richard Bachman are also heralded as being some of his, better work. And it was actually like somebody discovered through like similarities in the style that he was writing as that these were the same people, which, is an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that artists have been doing for a long time, that kind of like test case. In fine art, Michel Duchamp did it with his urinal fountain thing, and it, like blew the socks off Philadelphia High Society when they were like, "Oh my God, he did that!" Yeah, so I like that as a way to manipulate the critics.
Yeah, I really like Stephen King. I've read a number of his books. I even read his book on writing, where he talks about like his creative process and things like that. Um, I think in many ways he is a foundation to horror and a lot of horror movies. Um, Often the adaptations of his books gain more acclaim and are more revered than the books himself. For example, like Shawshank Redemption was a short story he wrote, and that is, at the top of people's, greatest movies of all time list. Um,
Yeah, even if it didn't win an Oscar.
yes, even if it lost the best picture to Forrest Gump. Um, also
Yeah.
movies like Misery, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
He tried directing one movie, Maximum Overdrive, and that, failed pretty hardcore. But I think that was also, and we'll talk about this at the height of his like, drug abuse and addiction, which this story is very much a part of. This is from an era where Stephen King was an alcoholic, and he's writing about writers, which is something that he writes a lot about, and the book focuses a lot more on like um, the horrors of the Overlook Hotel influencing the characters and making them go crazy, not necessarily like this idea in the movie that these people were a bit unhinged to begin with, and they're just like isolation and relationships deteriorating into violence as being the theme. Um, Stephen King really hates this movie. He doesn't think Kubrick like understood the basis of like this being about the haunted house and its effects on people, and he thinks a lot of it was just like for shock value. So in 1996, he would go on to produce a mini series to better adapt the book, and this was filmed at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, which is the hotel that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. That hotel has gone on to host like its own horror festivals and has been on Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures as being like a super haunted hotel, despite the fact that not having a necessarily truly haunted history. It's just kind of gotten that. Um,
Yeah,
when
and spoiler alert to anybody who watches Ghost Adventures or Ghost Hunters, neither of them caught shit in this hotel. It was not one of their best productions for finding any ghosts.
Yeah, I
Might
don't.
you might be able to find Bigfoot out in the woods though.
Yeah,
They didn't try that.
yeah, especially out there in Colorado. Uh,
Yeah, if Bigfoot's gonna exist, it's gonna exist somewhere out there, and you know.
yeah, and I think ghosts would exist somewhere where people have actually died. I couldn't find anything about people dying at the Stanley Hotel, although there was a gas explosion, which injured several workers, none of the guests. But a big point and the climax of the book is like this through line of Jack like fighting with the boilers of the hotel to keep the hotel like heated and warm so none of the pipes burst. And he like sacrifices himself to cause the boilers to explode so Danny and um, Wendy can get away and escape like this nightmare. So
Mm.
it's very different, but it has a lot of like, it has similar characters and themes. Um, One thing they wanted to do is have these like topiaries that torment Jack as he's doing maintenance. But the technology for that didn't like exist at the time. In the miniseries, I think they were able to do it with some kind of CGI then. Um,
Garrett, the first thing I thought of was Laszlo from What
uh,
They Do in the Shadows and his topiaries, and what torment that would be to see those around the corner of the hotel.
yeah, that would be truly terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is something that we'll discuss a little later on, but I think that part of the reason why the Stanley Hotel just, doesn't have the haunted appeal that you would want it to is that the Stanley Hotel in the movie is very different from the real life Stanley Hotel through the, manipulation of cinematography and sets and, filming in a way that is really magical. And that's certainly why the Stanley Hotel is a letdown when you go see it. So, you know, um, don't go book a hotel room in the Stanley Hotel if you think you're going to have fun. There's plenty of other haunted hotels in the country to go be in.
Yeah,
Liminal spaces are not there.
yeah, uh, yeah. We'll definitely touch on that a little bit more. Um, a couple other things about this movie before we keep going. This was one of the first or one of the early films to use Steadicam. So this is you have a film camera inside a like stabilizing ring, so you're able to like run and walk with the camera rather than using the cart and dollies. Um, this was invented by Garrett Brown, who became involved with the production after meeting Stanley Kubrick and seeing a lot of the sets and understanding what they were able to do. Um, so they were able to pioneer some new like tactics and ways of using it. Um, some notable scenes that included it were the chase through the maze at the end, and then Danny riding around the hotel on his big wheel. It gave a much better way to show like perspective and depth and try to get like almost point of view shots through a lot of the characters.
Yeah, and that, it's so iconic to that movie, and it's something that I noticed right away. And it's something that Kubrick will use over and over in his different films is this kind of technique of, using the camera and the angle of the shot to manipulate our perspective as the viewer.
Yeah. So this movie was made for just under $20 million, which, not a ton, but it didn't have a great box office return, only 47 million. It opened against The Empire Strikes Back,
Ooh,
which, yeah, that's quite an opening weekend.
choices.
So at the time, though, a lot of people were fearful of sequels, especially sci-fi sequels, and there was, rumors of The Empire Strikes Back not having a lot of hope. So, people were on the fence, but it made so much money and is probably the most iconic Star Wars. Um,
Yeah.
the Shining had a much more limited release, but made about the same per screen opening weekend. Uh, there was also a European cut that released, I think, a couple weeks later, and that removed several scenes that didn't take place in the hotel, including the opening scene of Danny and the psychiatrist, and then a few scenes with Dick Halloran. Um, and there was also an alternate ending to the film where Jack's body is never found, and it's kind of like, ooh, where'd he go? And people didn't like that. Kubrick didn't like that either, so they took that out. Um, the film opened to mixed reviews from critics. Everybody, generally said, "Oh, this is a very like visually stunning film," but at the time, it was very slow for a horror movie, and because it
Mm.
was marketed as such, people were a bit disappointed. You know, if you think of some of the slasher films or other haunted house films like Halloween or the Amityville Horror or Alien that came out the year before, this has a whole this has a whole different vibe to any of those.
Hmm. Yeah, it's much closer to The Exorcist in that kind of like slow roll and build toward everyone just going crazy and everything going to shit.
Yeah, it really does. And Kubrick has been noted as saying The Exorcist is one of his favorite films. So I think you can definitely see, especially in the pacing and in like this descent into madness throughout this film, as you know, inspired at least in part by that movie.
Yeah, and then I keep thinking about how you said that Kubrick was one of the people that they talked about filming The Exorcist to begin with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think that it would be an amazing like project for somebody to like do a storyboard and kind of like work through like what would Stanley Kubrick's The Exorcist look like, because that film I want it to be made posthumously, because it would be just such a, you know, incredible film of combining elements from A Clockwork Orange and The Shining to create that, you know, the suspense, but also like religious iconography. And yeah, that would be fascinating. So if anybody's in film school and wants to give me an executive director credit, feel free.
Yeah. They'll make that, and then we'll do the remake of The Exorcist with Rocky.
Yeah, he will be required to be in the film. So, the music and score in this movie is phenomenal.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk about Wendy Carlos and Rachel Elkin-Tor. They were just pivotal to not just the score of this film and also many other Kubrick films, such as A Clockwork Orange, but also very pivotal in early electronic music. So, if you are an electronic music person, I've talked about it before on the podcast how I'm obsessed with the electronic scene from 1979. These two women changed this scene entirely, and they should be household names to anybody that's into techno, electronica, any of those kinds of genres. Look them up. Look up their synthesized versions of Bach. It's just incredible work that they did to move music fundamentally forward. The 80s music, pop music, like Aha and the Psychedelic Furs and you know, like all of that kind of stuff never could have happened without these two. And they changed a lot of music and film in incredible ways. And we don't talk about like women in cinema and production as much as we should. And these two are definitely people that you should look up and look into. And I have always thought that the music and score in this film has been incredible, but like seeing it and really like thinking about how they use sound to create suspense, to create silence, to create you know, just bizarre atmosphere. The synthesizer and the organ and the electronic organ are just phenomenal instruments that I think horror movies need to embrace wholeheartedly again. And we just
Mhm.
need to return to 1979 musically, and I'll be a happy camper.
Yeah, the opening of this movie has a really fantastic score as they're flying through the mountains, um, and there's you know the just really loud, deep, resonating sounds, and tons of other parts in this movie that it's not necessarily like music, but it's a lot of like soundscapes and stings that I think really uh, craft a good environment and bring more life to the sets and interactions of the inhabitants of the hotel.
Yeah, and it's definitely something like the music is subtle in a way that, like, if you're not an audiophile or if you're not paying attention to it, it will just be part of the atmosphere and you won't necessarily notice it. So if you've watched The Shining recently and you have no idea what we're talking about and you're like, well, I don't remember that at all, that's on purpose. Like they made it so that it didn't take away from the acting and the visuals and the writing and blah blah blah. Like the scene, so the first time we see Danny riding his big wheel around the hotel, the first thing I noticed was the change in the sound as he went from carpet to hardwood floor
Yeah.
to tile. Like that was just incredible. And it created a sense of anxiety because it was, like it would change at a rhythm that was not like it wasn't like a normal rhythm because the carpets were of different lengths and different distances apart, and that was just so subtle and so cool and such a good way to create dissonance and anxiety in an early scene in the film.
Yeah, and especially that was a scene that was shot with the steady cam, and they were like pushing the sound guy and the cameraman around in a wheelchair to like match the speed, and they had developed like a rig with a speedometer on it to keep going at like a constant speed to follow Danny around. And apparently they almost got into an accident with the car, like it was with the cart, it was like overstrained, and a wheel flew off. But it, that I think is one of those scenes that gets parodied a lot because of its like visual and audio significance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are just so many scenes where the music is just phenomenal. So I again and again I am blown away by Kubrick's use of music in his films.
Yeah, just excellent stuff. So there are also costumes in the film. Everybody has a look to them.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was very interesting, so the costuming is done by Milena Canonero. I'm probably saying that wrong, but I'm not very good at these things. But anyway, she had previously worked with Kubrick before doing the costuming on A Clockwork Orange, and she goes on to being the main costumer for a lot of Wes Anderson films, a lot of Sofia Coppola films, my favorite being Marie Antoinette. And I mean, if there's a movie that happened in the last 20 years that you can talk about costuming, Marie Antoinette is it, because that is some phenomenal costuming and set design in that movie. But one of the things that I liked, what she did here is she put all of the characters in these incredibly wholesome clothes.
Yes.
Like it's like Shelley Duvall's character is in such like she's fully covered. Of course, they're in this, wintry atmosphere in this hotel. It's not very warm. There's nothing like sexy about her. It's very wholesome, and despite her being very beautiful with her big eyes and big lips, like it makes her look very dowdy and also very youthful. The pinafores and the overalls. They give her this like innocent youth to her that she uses a lot in the film to make her seem, you know, um, like, oh, I was just trying to help, or oh, I didn't know you wanted this silence right now, or, those kinds of things, which I thought was it was a really good touch.
Yeah, she seems very real. Um, you know, other
Yeah.
than in the scene where she's at the house, she kind of looks like a Raggedy Ann doll, but that, you know,
Well, I mean that certainly could be on purpose to make her seem very doll-like and very
you
dumb and
very
ditzy.
innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I would like to put out because we have it on screen, Danny's Apollo um sweater. So
Mhm.
this film has a bunch of bonkers conspiracy and like media theories behind it. One of which being like there are subtle hints throughout that point to Stanley Kubrick filming the fake moon landing footage. one of them being the sweater. And this film, 1980s, what did every kid want to be, post moon landing? Every kid wanted to be an astronaut. Um,
Absolutely.
you,
Yeah.
you see Danny playing with his fire truck and other toys. It wouldn't surprise me if one of the toys was like a rocket or a spaceship or something. Like this is not outside of the wheelhouse of any child to have this. Um,
Yeah, and it's also like one of those patterns that would have shown up in a ladies' magazine and grandma would have knit the sweater. It's
yeah,
like we had sweaters like this growing up that, like very similar kind of concept and design, very wholesome, very like handmade. A lot of Shelley's clothes look like she could have made them. Like the Raggedy Ann costume for sure. The overalls less so, but I mean, these are lower middle class people, and they're also very late 70s in their look. Like the clothing choices were done in particular to ground this movie in this point of time.
hmm
Yeah. And Danny, very much a kid next door. He's wearing just stuff that other kids would have worn. Jack Nicklaus's character doesn't wear anything exciting. He's just wearing, like dad wear in the 70s.
yeah, he has a jacket. Sometimes he puts that on. Um, he's pretty chill.
Yeah, and I think that they also did this to, make sure that the characters and their costumes didn't compete with the real star of the show, which is the setting.
That was a good transition.
Thanks, Garrett.
So the setting, the hotel was based off of the interiors of a bunch of hotels around America. But everything you see that takes place inside is a built set. A couple were almost completely recreated, like the lobby was basically recreated from another hotel that exists, but they wanted to obviously do their own thing. And because photography took over a year to complete, they obviously needed a space that wasn't going to change, that they could use all the time and do whatever they wanted. Um, the exterior of the Overlook Hotel is the Timberline Lodge, which is in Oregon. So again, in this mountainous environment, uh, kind of depicted to the shot at the beginning, where they're flying through Glacier National Park in Montana. Um, so the Overlook Hotel is a character of its own throughout the movie. It is in many states. We see it in a couple different time periods. We see, a lot of weird designs and motifs. The Colorado Lounge has a lot of Native American iconography. It has a buffalo head and I think a uh, antlered deer head mounted on the walls, all these great big rugs. The Gold Room is very, at the time, modern and sleek and elegant. The carpets have these huge geodesic patterns, which definitely would be popular in the 60s and 70s. And all the rooms have like their own, design and personality and lots of, big, thick carpets and, uh, you know, uh, bright colors like the red bathroom here, the green bathroom in 237. It's a character of its own.
Yeah, when I was putting the slide together, there was so many different images that I could pull from to put in here. The green bathroom was one of them, but all the images I found had a nude woman in them, so I didn't want to include those in our, YouTube PowerPoint.
Yeah, we
But
can't have that.
there's the elevators that are very art deco-y, and the floor pattern, it's kind of art deco-y, kind of 70s. The maze and the little model of the maze is just an amazing little, like design.
Yeah, so the real hotel does not have a hedge maze out front, so that was added as like a set that they did. but in the final scenes of like shooting stuff in the maze during the winter sets, Kubrick would have set production rearrange the maze and then not give people updated maps, and he would laugh as people got lost in the maze. Um, just a little bit of the just evil presence that Stanley Kubrick brought to the production of this movie.
Yeah, that's really mean, and it's like we've talked about some other reasons why like they didn't tell people things, like in Jaws, the lady when they didn't tell her when the shark was gonna bite her, so that she acted all erratically. Like those things that create great scenes. Kubrick, at some point was just doing this to fuck with people, and that's not a good thing, but
It
it's a strategy.
it does end up, and I read about this in an article, being one of the things that like prompts directors and then the actors and actresses to like start having a much different relationship, especially after Uma Thurman's injury on the set of Kill Bill, where they really started to open up a more discussion of how directors should be treating actors and actresses, which is important because, as we'll talk about later, Shelley Duvall was pretty abused by the entire production, whether that was, wholly Stanley Kubrick's fault or, a lot of it was caused by it. But I think if we, looked at what was going on there with today's lens, it would be pretty bleak. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, don't forget too that this was filmed in the 70s, and we do have a totally different relationship now with workers and workers' rights and OSHA and all of those kind of things. Even like the equality between men and women actors
mhm.
is not, they're not equal right now, but it's certainly better than it was in 79. So, pros and cons.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention about the maze, as when you brought it up, one of the things I was confused about when you're following Danny and Shelley as they go through the maze, um, there's all of these like weird, they turn out to be the lights, but I didn't know that because we hadn't seen them in the dark yet.
Mhm.
We had just seen that, so I'm like, why are there all these weird alcoves in the maze for these light things? So I think it would have been fun to have a night scene in the maze before. It would have been less confusing, but I mean, an air of mystery in anything is really really, just this movie is just full of mysteries where you're always like, oh, what is that, what does that mean, like that's just weird.
There are also like these little standees that have metal triangles on them. I assume you could ring those and then somebody would come and get you if you were actually lost.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I also think, I wonder too, like how much more common were these kinds of hedge mazes, 40 years ago than they are right now? Because like maybe there is an expectation that viewers might have been to one of these before. But, growing up in the Midwest, it was a corn maze
Yeah,
or bust.
yeah.
So
Well, corn mazes are easy to maintain, I've got to imagine. Um,
they don't have lights at least.
yeah, that's true. But I mean, you can always just walk through the corn in one direction and get out. So,
So the other thing I wanted to talk about on this slide is, so I've been watching a lot of those like feng shui videos on YouTube thanks to the algorithm. And one of the things that I think is interesting now in retrospect is the table and chair positioning of Jack's like typewriter
mhm.
in that room means that, and he gets like walked up on more than once
Yeah,
in typing, and I think when Shelley's reading the transcript he comes up behind her.
yeah, because his
you know
back is kind of to another hallway. Yeah.
yeah, his back is to the creepy hallway that may or may not be near the elevators and the entrance to the building. Like, so it's just, if that is just a terribly anxious place to put your table where you're going to work. And it's so strange because like, oh, like places I would put my work table, so I could face the view outside, and see the mountains, or a smaller room, something more cozy. Or even like if I had this whole, hotel to myself, I might, like write in several different rooms.
Yeah.
The other thing that gave me a lot of anxiety about that room was when he's doing the handball thing and throwing the ball at the wall. It's like it's so anxiety inducing because you're like, oh my God, he's not going to catch the ball and it's going to crash and break something. Because there's so many breakable things in that room, including like stuff that's on the wall he's throwing the ball at.
Yeah, that one set me on edge because that's another one where the sound plays such a big part in the scene because of how just loud the thumping and bouncing of the ball
Mm-hmm.
is.
And it's very like heartbeat like in
Hmm.
its reverberation. So there's like multiple reasons why you're afraid. And these are very early on scenes where you get these senses of anxiety.
Yeah. So the Colorado Lounge is another one where we see Danny riding around on his trike, and he does a lot to like ride around different areas of this room. And he does another scene where he's riding around like the top around the balcony, and it's supposed to give us like this overview of the space. But as he rounds some of the corners, you're down like a standard hotel hallway that has rooms on each side, and one whole wall of rooms would just open up to above where the fireplace is. And this is one of those things that like a lot of people who've watched the movie have noticed, and something that I notice a lot in, movies and other media where like space doesn't line up right. And that like really breaks not necessarily immersion, but breaks my like mental map of where things are. Um, and this is, I think, one of those things that really it's big now in a lot of horror media and especially online media now of liminal spaces, these spaces of transition. This term was coined in the early 2020s based on the back rooms, which is basically like this just group of nondescript rooms. And when we see Danny like riding down these hallways of just doors and doors and doors with the same carpet, or when he encounters the twins in the floral hallway, it's not descriptive places, but like you feel like, yeah, you could have been there because that's any old hotel, that's any old building. Oh, he's riding through the kitchen. Well, that kitchen could be anywhere. Um, and it gives a very comparable sense of like scale and a bit of fear and uneasiness of like these spaces that should be full of people and life, and they're just empty and quiet and you know still brightly lit but spooky.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that gives us anxiety, and I think this is something that maybe Kubrick and like parents of the in '79 would not have been as attuned to, but growing up in the post John Benet Ramsey mindset that I've always been in, the idea that you could get kidnapped at any moment as a child is something that they drilled into our minds in the '90s after the satanic panics of the '80s. So seeing this child, like running around this giant hotel by himself, you have this fear for him that he's going to get lost, or, maybe there is somebody else in the hotel, or, like his parents aren't paying attention, he's riding a big wheel down the stairs or something, like there's a lot of like, as the viewer, I think the anxiety of watching Danny run around the hotel, without any supervision, it kind of like makes it turns on that helicopter parent part of your brain
Mhm.
where you're like, oh wow, like where is he going? Like what's he doing? Like what's gonna happen next? And he's also a very like sweet kid in a very similar way to The Exorcist, where he's not creepy. This isn't Damien from The Omen. This isn't, like some annoying, like hyperactive kid. It's not Angelica from the Rugrats. This
Yeah.
is, a very likable kid who listens to his parents and loves them and plays with his toys quietly and does all those things that quote unquote good kids are supposed to do. And you want him to, like be enjoying his time. He has his little imaginary friend, and you're like, of course he does, because he is spending all this time by himself. Like, even before they went to the hotel, they had pulled him out of school because he had that injury, so all of it, you're very much on Danny's side.
Hmm. You don't want to see any harm come to him. And I think that's one of the things that really sets Wendy off is when he gets injured and she's just like, oh, well, Jack must have done this. But then he says it's one of the, malicious entities, the bathroom lady who did this. And she freaks out. She's like, there's somebody else here with us. And, as a rational person who doesn't necessarily believe in ghosts or the supernatural, she's totally in the right of being like, my son told me somebody else is here that's doing this. This place is big enough, somebody could be hiding. Somebody could
Yeah.
have stayed up here. There's plenty of food. We're the only people they would have had to have avoided if they just come out at night while we're asleep. Like it would have been fine, and our guard's down. Um,
Well, and not even that, like because they're so isolated and the place is so big, somebody could have come up to the hotel and them not noticed,
yeah,
you know. They wouldn't even have to stay that whole time. So that's totally a possibility. Or, there's other things. Like there could be an animal in the hotel, like you're in the Colorado wilderness. It's totally possible.
oh yeah, a
Um,
bear, any kind of deer, even
yeah,
like
even just a raccoon could mess up
foxes.
a kid,
Oh yeah,
like yeah, it's totally, there are genuine fears, rational fears. So, in the list of like people who could have hurt her son, there's her husband, there's a stranger, there's an animal, there's he could have just done it to himself,
yeah.
like messing around too. This is a kid we're talking about.
Yes, we've both stupidly injured ourselves as dumb children. So,
Yeah, you more than me, but yeah, yeah.
um oh, so one more thing we wanted to talk about before we go on is we wanted to compare this to the Titanic, which, you might be thinking, what? Like, yeah. But both in the start of this film and in the Titanic, we get a couple scenes of like our main characters touring the premises. And that helps us in the Titanic to get a really good understanding of where everything is and the whole scope of the hotel and, everything it has to offer. In The Shining, it's almost the complete opposite of that. In the beginning we see the games room where Danny hangs out once. We never see that set again. We never see the hallway that he sees the twin girls in. We hardly go into the gold room, the ballroom. We don't get a good layout of where things are in relation to each other. In fact, in the movie, it seems to change where like the kitchen is in relation to the Colorado Lounge or where their apartment even is to begin with. um, it's it's very unnerving that even at the beginning you're confused and disorientated about the place that you're spending all this time, and you probably don't consciously notice it, but as
Right.
it goes on you definitely do.
And I think that this is exacerbated by so as the viewer, you're empathizing with
Yes.
this couple where, either you're, Wendy or Jack, and you're like going, like they arrive at the hotel when everyone is trying to leave. Like the people who are giving them the tour don't want to give them the tour because they want to get out of there. They're ready to go. They're ready to go home. So everything is like short, and they're like trying to keep track of everything, especially Wendy. She's trying to take track of all the things that she knows that she's going to end up having to keep track of as the winter goes on, and Jack is writing his novel, so she's going to have to deal with these boilers and figure out how the radio works, and what to do when the phone lines go down, and
Yes.
where all the food is, and also learn how to cook with an obscene quantity of ingredients. Like, she wasn't just making some fruit salad that would fit in a bowl. She was opening a gallon can of fruit salad to, like, I guess, like, eat for the next 3 months, because, like, oh my god, that's a lot of fruit.
One of my
um
favorite things about this movie that I haven't really heard anybody talk about is the fact that like Jack gets hired on to do the maintenance in this place and we never see him doing an ounce of work, and it is Wendy who is the most competent person, who's checking the boilers, who's cooking all the food, who's no doubt like cleaning and keeping the spaces nice and orderly. It's just very weird.
Garrett, that is gender dynamics at work, and
Yes.
your generation is going to be the first one to ever notice these things,
Yes, that's
because
true.
as even like me as a millennial, I'm like, well, so as soon as I saw that they would have to do certain tasks, I was like, ah, well, Wendy has to do that. Wendy has to do these boiler things. Like, of course she is, because A, Jack's already a little weird and unhinged,
Uh-huh.
and B, he's gonna think that this is too menial of a task to do, and I mean, that's gender dynamics as they've been for a long time.
So do we want to get into the scares?
I hold on. I do want
Okay.
to talk about that bathroom. So
Oh,
the
okay.
last image on the scene is of this red bathroom. And so one of my favorite things about A Clockwork Orange is the use of red in the whole film. From the title cards that are just like giant, like the red pierces your eyes. It is so bright, and it changes the synapses in your eyes when you stare at them, because it
Hmm.
is just so red and bright. And then later on in the film, red comes up again and again. Like there's a scene where a woman's wearing a red jumpsuit and things happen. So like red is just a important color in that movie. And so as soon as this scene happened and he's like jumped into this bright red bathroom, that, like, aesthetically, this bathroom should not exist.
It's
Like,
awful.
it is a, can you imagine being in this room? Like, the energy of this bathroom would be just incredible. Like, the anxiety and like the violence, like, and that's one of the reasons why they use red in A Clockwork Orange, because red means violence.
Yeah.
It pierces your eyes with violence, and that's what happens in this room. And where Jack's told, well, you got to take care of this issue you got now. So red, oh my god, like, there are very few settings in like places that I like go, like, that is the best thing I've ever seen, and this is one of them. I just loved this bathroom.
It's a good one.
10 out
In
of 10, would visit, do a ghost adventure in, and leave.
in this fictional bathroom.
That fictional bathroom is haunted as fuck, Garrett. I don't care if, like, the Overlook Hotel is haunted or not. That bathroom has bad vibes.
Well, I didn't
And
read
you
anything about
know,
production, but yeah, I imagine it
so
does.
the other thing, thinking about this, that if this bathroom were to exist, there is a 100% chance that it is in an airport.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it,
You're
it's
like, Denver Airport, is that you?
it's also strangely modern. It has these
Yes.
like it's a drop ceiling, it has the
Mm-hmm.
vents, it has those iridescent lights. It's it's very blocky. All the sinks are very square. It has all these like little square cubbies for napkins and things. It's very contrasting with every other part of the Overlook Hotel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could have been a set from 2001 Space Odyssey. Like it's so like,
The
oh my
bathroom on the
gosh.
moon.
Yeah. I mean, if Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing, this is the bathroom they used.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we should move on from that. But I love that bathroom and I want to experience this bathroom. Like if anybody's listening to this that is part of one of those like the like Instagram selfie experiences, you know? You know the places you can go to take pictures for Instagram that, have mirrors and cool lights.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, do they have those in Washington? They have them here. But
Uh,
anyway,
they probably do.
yeah, I think that somebody should recreate this bathroom because I want to experience this bathroom. I'm just saying.
Okay. Well, I don't see any stalls in there, so I think you're gonna have a difficult time.
They might have a women's. What do you think the women's version of this bathroom looks like?
Well, uh,
Chartreuse, maybe?
yeah, I don't know. Um, Probably a lot more sinks.
Okay. Wow. You've never been in a women's bathroom, have you?
So I have my experience working in a movie theater had me replacing soaps and paper towels, and the women's bathroom was always a lot more messy, and you did have way more sinks, and there was even a place to sit down in there. The women's bathroom was a very weird thing, and as a man who exclusively uses the men's room, it's a very different experience. It's a very different space.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't think we'd get to bathroom dynamics in this episode, but we're doing
Hey,
it. We're hitting
you know.
the points.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into my feelings about bathrooms on the pod. So
You
let's.
have been. You've gone on a bathroom rant.
I'm in gender in bathrooms, but anyway.
Okay, well we'll move on to the spooks.
Yeah. So one of the things in this movie that I thought was interesting was very early on, we are given these images of the spooky things.
Yeah. So Danny has the vision of the river of blood as a part of, I think, his very first seizure that the lady comes and checks on. We see the twins in the scene where he's in the games room at the start of the Overlook Hotel, and we have Mr. Ullman telling Jack about the grisly murder all at the very beginning. We also have an allusion to the Donner Party, who apparently the hotel is supposed to be like somewhere around where the Donner Party event happened. And one thing I think that's interesting, which we haven't touched on, is a lot of the references to media in this film. Uh, Danny somehow knows about the Donner Party and like cannibalism and about eating people, and Wendy's like shocked by this, and Jack's just like, "Well, he heard it on the TV. It must have been okay." It's very strange. But at the beginning, we're alerted to this place being built on Indian burial mounds. We're ready for the scares.
Yeah, they do set up all of the like traditional, spooky things. We have a murder, we have a river of blood, we have Indian burial grounds, we have historic cannibalism. So yeah, these are all like classic, things. They don't mention any bears or anything. They could have thrown that in there.
Yeah, that would also be scary. Um, we do have several other ghosts in the hotel that like we're not really alerted to. One of which is in a bear costume or a dog costume. That one's really weird.
Yeah, that one is incredibly weird and it's very brief as well.
Yeah.
Um, and
So
then yeah, go on.
so one thing I think that is supposed to be like an allusion to is and I think the woman in room 237 that like Jack starts making out with is like this underlying idea of hotels being used as like a place for infidelity, of like, you know, cheating on your spouse, or like, you know, hooking up or like spending time with people that way. And we see that in like these ghosts and as like people's fears. And you know, you see the woman in, or the guy in the bear costume, and then the old guy, Wendy sees that, and like, is that playing on her like subconscious mind of like, you know, not wanting to be cheated on, or you know, something like that. I think that's what those scenes are alluding to, and they're not just there to be like, ooh, look at this weird shit that's happening.
Right, yeah. And I think that the well, I actually think the guy in the bear costume was a very deliberate, pushing the envelope, kind of a scene. And I'd be interested to know if that was in the book.
I don't remember.
The other thing about the woman in the bathtub is that is an allusion to the very common trope, and I know this from watching so much Ghost Adventures, is every hotel has suicides in it because you don't commit suicide at home because you don't want your family to find you. You want
Fair.
to commit suicide in a hotel where, just some anonymous employee ends up finding you. And especially her being in the bathtub, like, there that could happen there. It's also that hotel room is so weird with the steps and
Yes.
then that bizarre bathtub. And I mean, would I like to live there? Yes, probably, but I am weird. And you okay, Caitlin also likes green bathrooms with green tubs. Like, we're putting it out here. Caitlin likes red bathrooms and green bathrooms.
I'm starting to think you just like bathrooms.
Uh, as a millennial who would love to own a home, bathrooms are very
I
nice.
mean, that green bathroom is bigger than any bedroom I've ever
Yeah, that suite
had.
is definitely bigger than my apartment.
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, fully.
Yeah, and a part of the sets again is there are so many that are so much bigger than anything that could fit in the exterior shots too, like the Colorado
Yeah.
Lounge, all these apartments. Like there's no way all of these rooms can actually fit in this place.
Yeah, it's very much that, like, like the bag of holding. Like, you
Yeah.
you get inside and it's, infinitely big. Um, yeah. The other set, which I didn't include in any of the slides, also because it has nudity, was the home in Florida, where we find the cook character, who I can't remember his name right now.
Dick Halloran, played by Scatman Crothers.
Yeah, his home, which has the beautiful, very artistic pornography in it, which I thought was an incredible touch. Very
Yes.
Kubrick,
Yes.
really beautiful.
Yes.
Um, can't post that on YouTube either, but
No.
definitely look it up if you're into that kind of thing because it is very artistic, very 1979, very beautiful.
It's very interesting that the homes of these people have so much more character than the Overlook. It really
Hmm.
makes those places seem weird in comparison because they're full of details and personality, and the rest of the movie is like devoid of that individuality, of that like lived in presence.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely don't get the feeling that anybody lives in the Overlook, even in their little apartment. Which another set design thing in their little apartment, the use of the mirror to in that apartment
Yeah.
when you see people will come in the door and you'll be able to see Jack laying in bed or sitting on the bed in the mirror so you can see them and Jack at the same time. Just incredible shots. Mirrors are one of the things that horror movies can use to just, and we saw that in The Ring.
Hmm.
They use it to just phenomenal effect because, us viewers, like it, even like me sitting right now, I'm sitting on my bed, I have a mirror on my wall. what I can see in that mirror, like, oh, it's a hoodie, like, oh, it can like creep you out just by, like having mirrors. There's also, on Ghost Adventures, they go into, like how mirrors, especially like mirrors that face each other, can create portals, which, yeah, I'm not going to believe that, but you can. I was at a mirror in a hotel in Georgia the last time I went down to, it was a historic hotel down there, and there were two mirrors that face each other
Mhm.
in a hallway that was, I mean, they weren't more than 8 feet apart. So like when you're looking at yourself in the mirror behind you, it does create just a weird effect
Yeah.
that I mean, bad vibes. We talked about the red bathroom, bad vibes. When
Yes.
you have mirrors that face each other, bad vibes.
Yeah. It creates
And
that like infinity look.
yeah, and it really can increase like a liminal space too, because if
Mhm.
you're sitting somewhere, you look at a mirror and you just see infinitely down a hallway, like, ooh, that it creates the like what's around the corner question, which is so important in a horror movie set in a setting like this.
Yeah, especially when we get that what's around the corner with Danny on his trike when he sees the spooky children.
Yeah. And the spooky children are really spooky. Like
Yeah,
they did a good job. They're not twins. They're sisters that are like 8 and 10,
yeah,
but they're dressed the same. They're almost the same height. They have the same hair, so they look like twins. Like, and they have just like creepy vibes, like little girls in fancy dresses just have.
yeah. It's like they're dolls, but they're real and they're freaky.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Totally.
we also wanted to talk about the River of Blood, which is probably the most iconic thing from The Shining, um, in terms of like just pure visuals. There are a number of scenes that are iconic, but this was used in tons of the trailers, as like a marketing material. It's one of the scenes in the film that gets repeated several times. Danny has vision of this. Um, so there's a lot of like myth behind the production of this film and this scene in particular. I've heard some people say that they shot this film like 100 times, or they shot this scene 100 times. That's a different scene in the film that they did shoot 100 times. This one they shot once, because it's a huge mess. Um, so the effects people worked for weeks to make a fake blood that was, the right color red, the right consistency, all that. And they had these elevators, and they just filled one of them brimming with blood. And you can see at the beginning of the scene, it starts to like leak and drip through because it's a fluid. It's not watertight. These doors have to open. And they set up, I think, 4 or 5 different cameras to capture the blood flowing through the door. The door was buckling the whole time under the pressure of all this liquid. Just obviously it's huge. It's like if you put a door on the side of a swimming pool, it's gonna burst open. Um, so this was done in one take. Kubrick could not watch. He could not watch it happen. It was, a stressful thing that they were setting up that they really wanted. They wanted it to work right. And despite him being a perfectionist, it was just, going to be too much to see it go wrong if it did go wrong. Um, what happened was greater than any of their expectations. The camera operators were fearful that they would be swept away in this torrent of blood. They didn't think it was going to pick up and move the furniture like it did and just start tossing the room around. The way that like the blood just flows off the walls like a great wave, just spectacular. Kubrick was incredibly happy with the result, and that's where it was. They used this in tons of promotional imagery just because it's freaky, it's weird, and it's nonsensical, but it helps like that just spooky and otherworldly and like demonic nature of this place.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that like, it doesn't actually have any like like there's no plot to this. Like there's
No.
no reason why it's full of blood. There's no like it doesn't actually impact any of the characters other than like they see it and they run away.
Yeah.
And Danny sees it in his visions, and like I think multiple people see it in visions. And so like it doesn't, like, you don't see any of the characters like being like swept away by the blood, but it is so impactful. And it's also just like the practical effect of doing it. They did this. No director in 2023 would do this.
No, it would be cheaper, easier, and cleaner to do it with CGI. A hundred
Which
percent.
is dumb because like, and that's the thing. I want directors to have the balls to have red bathrooms and red doors and red blood and fill up rooms with this stuff to get like real fear. And also like I think that, and this is interesting because like in 1979 when they were filming this, there no one had seen a tsunami before because like people who saw tsunamis were dead. But you know, in 2023, like we can really appreciate the power of water
Yeah.
in ways that like before like film and YouTube of sharing those kinds of images happened, like we didn't really know what it would be like. And so like the fear of like what water can do and what this liquid can do, like that really, you know, affected me, especially when you see the, you know, the furniture moving and it going up the walls like it did. Just so beautiful. Like this is like, you know, we talk about The Ring and like that, you know, like art film being an art film, but just like this scene could be an art film for
Yeah.
any museum.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm glad they used it on all their promotional things. I'm also glad that they used it so limited in the movie because it does show up quite a few times, but no more than maybe 90 seconds.
Yeah, and they never show the full thing at once. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when Danny sees it, he sees like the doors opening and blood rushing out, or you see like from another angle, like the chairs moving and things. I don't think you ever see the whole take, which is good because it keeps that in your mind and you're like building the picture of this in your head the whole time. It's always there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would be interested too to see some of the and maybe that's what I'll do after we record this, is see some of the old trailers that use this and, you know, see if they, you know, employed other techniques like slow motion and, you know, like putting like I'm imagining them putting like classical music over this. You
Yeah.
know, it's kind of like a magnum opus of this blood, you know, coming out.
Yeah, the cameras that they used, they set them all to like different specs, and I think one of them was supposed to like capture it in slow motion, like use a different frame rate to do so.
Hmm. Yeah, really incredible stuff. 10 out of 10. Solid.
So the final big fear in this film is really the cabin fever aspect. This like feeling of isolation, similar to what we talked about in The Thing, but this is much different because there are so fewer people, um, and especially Jack's sabotaging of all the technology and things to keep them locked in and isolated, and to keep Halloran from like communicating with them. It's very freaky. Um, I think a big part of Jack's downfall is this like desire he has to use this time and the pressure that he puts on himself to like be creative and write this story. And you never see him taking a break and going and playing in the hedge maze with Danny, or actually like doing the work or doing anything really that could um get his creative juices flowing. You see him really trying to force it. And
Yeah, other than playing like the handball and, you know, like kind of just wandering around.
Yeah,
On the other hand, that is, I think that is a result of more of a toxic masculinity mindset where it's like, I'm not going to play with my kid. I'm not going to, do these menial tasks. I'm not
right.
going to cook dinner, because that's not my job. My job's to write this novel. Um,
Yeah, and we do see Wendy spending a lot of time with Danny, and I think Jack's sanity would have helped there. But yeah, it's he's definitely like the pinnacle of toxic masculinity.
yeah, because like he's too good to, spend time with his kid, and he's just too good for that. Yeah. And it is too bad because you're right. It would have helped him, get out of that. And his isolation is really self-imposed. Like he was there with his family, but he was actually really alone, and that made them alone too. Thankfully they had each other. But, as a woman, hanging out with your kid is not the same as hanging out with an adult or your husband.
Right.
And like we see that when Wendy is on the phone with the sheriff's office, when she finally gets in touch with them and
Oh,
it's like, hey,
yeah, she's having so much fun talking to them. She has a smile on her face and is playful. And when the guard is using over and the radio code, she starts using it too. Like that's a really great scene that just gives her a lot more depth. And like she never has those sort of interactions with Jack. It's very
right.
dour.
When you can also feel her loneliness too, and her wish to keep the conversation going, and really her disappointment when she realizes that he wants to get off the phone.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because I mean, you really like they do things like that to really make you feel bad for her and Danny too. She's a simple woman and she has a weird kid who, is going through a phase and, may or may not have supernatural powers, which she doesn't know that, but
Right.
she thinks he's, just a weird little kid, and a husband who is not right. And he wasn't right before this all started either.
Right. At the beginning of the film, we're like alerted to the fact that he used to be an alcoholic, and in one night he ended up like twisting Danny's arm or like dislocating it or something. And he, we're never given like the indication that everyone's over it. Like Wendy kind of talks about it almost like very casually as like, oh yeah, it's something that happened, but it was an accident.
Hmm.
But like there are scenes with Danny and Jack when he goes into the room to like get his fire truck and he has to be quiet about it, where there's like still some like fear and intimidation in him.
Well, and I thought that, you know, that was because of Danny sensing the bad vibes in the hotel and maybe a change in his dad,
That's
in
definitely
that
part of
particular
it.
scene. Yeah, I didn't get the feeling that Danny had a bad relationship with his dad at the very beginning. I think that, because Danny from the very beginning is getting these flashes of, the blood elevator and, stuff like that. So, he already doesn't want to go to the hotel.
Right.
Um, so, but at the same time, like when Jack's interviewing for the position at the hotel, he's weird. He gives off weird vibes, and the hotel people just don't care because they just want somebody to live there, and they're like,
Yeah.
well, this guy's good enough. And you can see that in his facial expressions. Like he just there's just something off about him from the very beginning. And Jack Nicholas is just such a good actor and emotive person in order to, just show how like he gets crazier over time with all his facial expressions, and like the one we captured on the screen of him like just like laughing with his mouth open, at the situation because he doesn't quite believe that he's going crazy either and is a little surprised and taken aback by it.
Yeah, his descent into madness is interesting to say the least. He was always kind of a bit kooky, a bit crazy. Um, being a Stephen King character and especially a writer kind of based off himself, he's already a bit unhinged. Um, there's a scene where he's at the bar when he first sits down, and he mumbles this, but he says he'd give his soul for a glass of beer. And I always felt that like that was the first scene where like the ghosts really start to be like, we got him. Because after he says that, he has the interaction with the bartender, and like that whole room kind of comes alive, and then he comes back in there several times, and he has the interaction with the butler Grady. It's one of those where he kind of like lets the craziness in himself.
Yeah.
A lot of that because he's not interacting, because he's just dealing with it internally and not like you know doing anything good.
Right. And like in a way, it's easy to assume that all of these things are just him having hallucinations. Like there could be, no actual supernatural element to this film. All of the, spooky things that we've talked about are either hallucinations by Danny or by Jack.
So I definitely see that interpretation, but there are too many things that like just directly contradict it. Like we haven't really talked about the titular Shining, which is like this mystical connection people can have with each other. But like that's real. Like Danny really reaches out to Dick Halloran across America to like save him. Um, they have conversations, they're able to like do that. uh Danny is like physically looking weird. You believe his story that he was assaulted by the lady in the tub. When Jack is locked in the storeroom, somebody undoes the lock, and it's certainly not Wendy or Danny, who are like basically indisposed at the moment. Like there are real things happening here that we can't just chalk up to people's minds. And that's something I think that gets touched on at the beginning of the movie when we're talking about, the Grady who killed his family with an axe. Is it's like, what were the ghosts doing then, or what were the entities or the presence doing then that like drove him to this? Because he certainly wasn't the same as Jack. He was different. He would have had a different effect. So, it's I this is another one of those things that I think gets brought into the conspiracy mythos behind this, of it being all in their heads. Uh, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that that is reading just a little too far into it and not having relevance.
Well, and I think that it's kind of like when you talked about the book earlier, I can imagine this is one of the things that Stephen King didn't like was that, the name of the movie is The Shining. They mention The Shining once
Yeah,
and it is used twice. So, I think that had that been emphasized a little more, um, I think that would have changed that and given me more of the, understanding that there were supernatural things
right,
going on other than it just all being in their heads.
right.
But, and then Wendy does see the blood
And
elevator. She's
yeah,
the one that sees that.
and she goes into the lobby and sees a bunch of skeletons in there.
Oh
Um,
yeah, the skeleton lobby and then also the bear in
yeah, the
the
bear
open
guy.
door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some interpretations that people think, oh, everything's in Wendy's head. And again, I think that's just really reductive. It makes the film more boring to be like, oh, this is all like happening in their minds, because I think that's just boring. I think that takes out a lot of the like, care and attention they did to creating a mythos of all of these like ghosts and beings, and like, the hotel that changes to like feed on these people.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't have to be a yes or no. It could be an
Right.
either or too. Some things like the conversation that Jack has in that bathroom, that could have been totally an internal, like, oh yeah, I need to murder my family now, you know. Um,
Yeah, like he was already admitted to and capable of having the horrible dream, the nightmare that he did do that. So
mhm,
like it's in his head as something, oh, maybe he's talking to Grady as his imaginary friend, like Danny talks to Tony. Um,
mhm.
a nice parallel there. There are a lot of those like parallels in the movie, like the twins is a very overt example, but like, people going crazy and doing things like that. There's a lot of it, a lot of the double stuff. I thought about talking about it, but there's just like a lot of examples, and I haven't like come to a conclusion what that means organically.
Yeah, I think that, it's about balance and it's like the two elevator doors. It's, like the chairs that are parallel each other across the room, the two doorways on the side of the staircase.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's just a balancing effect. I also like the contrast between Wendy and the woman in the green room too. We have a very like Swedish blonde woman versus, Wendy and her aesthetic. I think that's important.
Mhm.
Also the aesthetics of that room in contrast to the very homey room that they're in.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. The very white bathroom that they're in versus my, you know, red bathroom.
yeah, and the green. Their
Mhm.
space is so much like, I think they use the term cozy or homely, but it's really a lot different than a lot of the like Art Deco and then like kind of contemporary spaces. It's very
Yeah.
strange.
And they also like the way that they said it kind of made them sound, disappointed that they were staying there instead
Yeah,
of, one of the like nice fancy Art Deco suites.
yeah,
Which, is interesting. And then it's like, why, well, if they were disappointed, why didn't they go to a different room? Because they could have, as the guy even pointed out. Oh, if you don't like it, you can go anywhere in the hotel. You can sleep in every bed if you want.
yeah. That's an interesting detail. I know they say that like only one part of the hotel's like rooms are heated, like only one wing. But again, this hotel exists in like a pocket dimension of impossible spaces. So, what the hell does the boiler even mean? Um,
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, well, maybe only one wing was heated at a time because you would want to heat them all,
yeah, there's a logistics thing that we're not privy to because Wendy is dealing with it in
yeah.
the scenes.
Wendy's got it under control.
Yeah. Um, so another part of the cabin fever element extends to the cast and crew of this film that took over a year to shoot. Um, Stanley Kubrick kind of drove everybody mad. A combination of really long shooting days, constant changes to the scripts, tons of sets that had to be built and designed. There are many scenes you can see where chairs and things like that are moved, rooms that kind of change where they're located. Small things that if you notice them kind of extend the eeriness of what's going on. Um, we mentioned before a myth of a scene being reshot many times. The scene where uh, Shelley Duvall is confronting Jack on the staircase with the baseball bat was reportedly shot over 127 times. It holds a Guinness World Record for the most reshot scene, um, and you can really see it in her face, the like torment that Jack is putting her through, and the torment that Jack is being put through by her. They both kind of have that perspective. And I think after so many times of them giving them their all, perhaps both of their breakdowns were completely genuine. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely think that is possible. I also like, and then in that scene, like one of the things that I noticed right away is like, why would you start going up the stairs? like the higher ground is nice, but she had just told Danny to go to his room, which wasn't upstairs. It was on that same level, or at least it had most recently been on that same level.
Yeah.
So like, you know, her like going up the stairs, like, you know, like there's an element of like, why are you doing that tension? And then, you know, like that's how she's able to escape. And yeah, really great scene. Again, like the look on her face, it's just like so piercing.
And you can still tell her humanity is there because she has like this intense sense of worry when Jack falls backwards down the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's done something truly terrible and reprehensible, despite the fact that Jack would, you know, very likely do something a lot worse. Um,
Yeah, and I think that she, you know, she thinks that this is a temporary insanity, and
mhm.
you know, like the idea of cabin fever is something that, you know, is in the zeitgeist of humanity. So like we understand this is something that can happen to you.
Yeah,
So she's just like, oh my God, he's gone crazy. He's been writing the same phrase over and over, like, oh my God, I have to protect myself and Danny, but she doesn't want to kill him because she could have killed him, you
oh,
know, and she
easy.
probably thought she did, you
Yeah.
know. And then she drags him to the pantry where she can lock him up, um, which is an interesting, you know, mechanism, not OSHA compliant.
Yeah, being trapped in a pantry or in a freezer, that sounds like a pretty awful experience. But at least
Yeah.
he has some food, and when we see him in another scene when he's talking to the ghosts on the outside of the door, he's like already eaten some crackers and like has had a snack. So
Oreos. I think there were Oreos in that shot.
okay. Um,
Yeah. Well, there was a whole bunch of things. Like he really had a smorgasbord. There was like peanut butter and
yeah.
like some kind of granola bar and Oreos and potato chips.
And
Yeah.
well, because you know he couldn't cook a meal for himself.
Right. Well, and I mean, you know,
Not that he has the ability, you know, he doesn't have the stove in there, but he doesn't have the ability to do it because
yeah.
he's a toxic man. Um,
Yes.
Other behind the scenes things, the scene where they're at the bar, they rehearsed that for 6 weeks and it was shot over the course of a 13-hour day. The bartender says he was soaked with sweat by the end of it. Just it sounds like a horrible experience, and that was just one day. Um, Jack Nicholson, he was given new scripts and updates constantly, and it got to the point where he would just throw the script away. They would hand him a script 5 minutes before they started filming because he was sick of learning lines and having to forget them when Kubrick would decide to change them. Um, Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy, also had a similar problem of like some of the lines and dialogue and would, you know, go back and forth with Kubrick on that. And he would be like verbally abusive to her in many scenes and essences of like, you know, disrespecting her acting or what she was doing. But she would go on to say like, I didn't know like what I was getting into, but I'm really pleased with the result. Don't know if they would do it again. You know, it's just not a great situation.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of torture happening on this set.
She was under so much stress at certain points that it made her physically ill, and she even claims her hair started falling out as a result, which is really depressing, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see that, you know, in the looks on her faces and you know, like being pale and all those things too.
Yeah, she definitely has a very emotive presence. She's very good at conveying what she's feeling.
Mhm.
You know, even though she looks, you know, this is another one of the action hero women that we've talked about that don't have the very standard attractive look. One of the actresses that was in the running to play this character was Jane Fonda, who's a very conventionally attractive woman who would go on to work with Jack Nicholson in other movies. But you know, it's again another one of those things of like these people who are more real are much easier to empathize with, are much easier to like get into the space of like, yeah, this is actually happening to them. And in many ways, I think her performance is one of those that's like she was terrified of everything that was involved. What she's experiencing is very real. And I think it's one of the things that really makes this movie as terrifying and dreadful and anxiety inducing as it
Yeah,
is.
indeed.
Um, I guess the last scene we can talk about, and this is interesting, is the scene where he's chopping through the door with an axe and does the famous "Here's Johnny" quote. Um, so Jack Nicholson was a volunteer fire marshal for a time. So he had an incredibly easy time chopping through fake doors. So they had to go out and get real doors to do that scene, which is impressive because he cuts through that door like it's butter. And part of me thinks that he was using a lot of the anger and instability of working on set to really chop through that fucking door.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I mean, you can see that. And I agree. Like he really does chop down that door well.
And I really like the camera that follows his swings. It really helps convey that energy. Um,
Hmm.
just a really excellent shot. Really, really freaky, really scary to have, your husband chopping through a door to kill you. It's pretty badass.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you've already tried to escape and now you can't.
Yeah.
And you've locked him in a room and you're like, how did he get out?
Yeah, it was the ghosts.
Yeah, freaky.
What did we learn from The Shining?
Well, I have to say, the thing that I learned is if your husband is already a little mentally sketchy, maybe quit his well-paying and stable job to become a writer and recently abused your son, maybe you shouldn't go stay at a hotel in the middle of nowhere all by yourselves for months at a time.
That sounds like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, that's definitely what I learned.
Yeah.
Only take stable people to the middle of nowhere.
But the problem with that is very few stable people want to go to the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, maybe there's a reason for that. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, so this film contributed to a lot more of the scary movies that come later, particularly ones that focus on haunted houses and nightmare spaces. It continued to establish the trope of children just being creepy to be creepy. Um, Went on to spawn a sequel, another mini series. uh, really cemented Jack Nicholson as being this, crazy eccentric actor. Kind of tanked Shelley Duvall's career. She didn't really do a whole lot after this one. I think she got pretty burnt out. This was one of the last of Kubrick's movies. I think after this is, Eyes Wide Shut. Um, a couple others. It spawned a documentary, which we didn't talk about, but it isn't very good, called Room 237, which is a bunch of people talking about the various conspiracy theories that, kind of revolve around the ideas in this movie. We touched on one of them being the moon landing, but, other people talk about its influences on, the Native American cultures and part of Stanley Kubrick's desire to make a movie about the Holocaust, including like dour themes and like history of violence just infecting places. Um, this film really sums up a lot of the tropes of his movie career and you know aesthetic and style of being really over the top and demanding on a lot of not just the actors and actresses, but on the film crews, the set designers, the uh, filmmakers, just everybody being on top and trying to create a perfect movie, let's say.
Yeah, and I think that, it very is quintessentially a Kubrick movie. I think, Kubrick can be defined by The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, and 2001: Space Odyssey. His other films, Barry Lyndon, very, very different in tone, in theme, in filmography, just completely different film. Full Metal Jacket, um, totally different kind of thing. I think that the failures of Eyes Wide Shut, because I don't care for Eyes Wide Shut very much at all. I don't think that it is his best work, and I wish he could have used so many of the things that worked so well in The Shining in Eyes Wide Shut, such
Hmm.
as, like having the setting be, amorphous, and be a place. Like if Eyes Wide Shut had had a place that was a character in addition to everything else that was going on, that would have improved it. It also could have been improved by having fewer settings, having fewer characters, having more influence of music, having lighting and bizarre set design. That would have all helped make it, a better film. And that was 19 years after this, at the very end of his career and life.
Yeah.
So it's too bad that he lost maybe some of this. But he also, Eyes Wide Shut is also a movie that is very 1999,
Yeah.
and this movie is very 1980. Like
Yes.
it did it is it 1980 because of the way it was filmed, and the choices they made, or because it's so iconic that this is what we think of as the early 80s?
Yeah, it definitely has its time and place.
Yeah.
It's definitely carved that out of being, uh, it's gotten a much different legacy after its release. A lot of people have looked back on it as being one of the most iconic horror movies. They look at Jack Torrance as being one of the top, movie villains. I know we talked about that with uh, Silence of the Lambs, but it's that same kind of idea that as these films become like, on demand or at the video store, they start gaining this like cult and mystique to them. And this is definitely one that, as time went on, such a greater appreciation to it came with it. Um,
Right.
one of the things we didn't touch on was the year this came out was the first year of the Razzies, which is like the opposite of the Oscars of being like, we're talking about the worst movies. And this movie was nominated for two of them, being the worst director and the worst actress. And as time went on, a couple years ago, the organization came out and issued a public apology to Shelley Duvall and saying she was the worst actress because the presence, the performance went underappreciated, and as time went on and the stories came out of how she was treated, you retract all that because it's not bad. You have to view it with a much different lens, and this is one that especially after going through COVID, of going through like these intense periods of isolation, it has such a different feel that's still like relevant, but still wholly identifiable of the 80s horror and 80s art genre, especially with the introduces of the Steadicam, of all the synth wave, of everything that like makes it a period piece, continues to elevate it through our current like cinema focus.
Right. Well, and I think another thing that's important to me in cinema and filmography is that if you told me this movie was filmed in 2023, I wouldn't believe you, because not because it's not good, it's that, it's so good
Yeah.
that I know that these are practical effects, and I know they won't do practical effects right now, and they won't do this kind of acting and, those kinds of things. Because, I mean, it stands up, all the visuals stand up just phenomenally in a way that, even some other movies that I think are just phenomenal, like Titanic and even A Clockwork Orange, like those movies, their visuals are great, but not not quite as perfect as this in standing up to that test of time of, is it 40 years, 30 years, 40 years, 40 years,
Yeah, 40
43
years.
years.
Damn.
Yeah, of filmography. If you told me that this movie was set in 1980 and it was filmed yesterday, I would be like, wow, they did a great job, you know.
Yeah, and even the sequel, I don't think captures the look and style of this one. And that's based on a whole load of things. But even when they go back to the hotel, they don't come close.
I think Kubrick was just the kind of artist that, is generational, and he had a vision and he had a style, and I think he also had the personality and, a following in order to make this happen.
Yes,
Because I don't think that most directors pitching this movie and doing it this way would have succeeded. It's kind of like James Cameron, pitching Titanic and, saying like, no, I want it to be the way I want it, and getting his way. Like, he could have not gotten his way and we could have not gotten this movie. And, somebody else would have done a just very different movie and we wouldn't be talking about it.
this is definitely one of those where if another director or another production or another team of people was behind it, nobody would have put up with what was going on. And in a
Right.
similar way, like being that this is a Stanley Kubrick movie, it has a much different reference. I think when we were talking before we recorded this, I said if this wasn't a Stanley Kubrick, nobody would care about it as much because it's very simple. But people love reading into Stanley Kubrick movies because of his precision, because of his desire to like have the vision. People look at every part of it and go, "Oh, there's all this Native American imagery. They say it's built on this burial mound. What does that mean? Does that have a relevance to the plot?" I've heard ludicrous theories, but that's like what it's about when you have a piece of art that is made by a group of incredibly competent and dedicated people to just be able to go and analyze it. You don't get that now because I don't think there exist too many people who are making this type of art, and that's a real shame.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is definitely the kind of film that, as I said earlier, like when we were talking about the blood scene, that, that scene might show up in an art museum, like in the film room in
Yeah.
an art museum. It's an art film. But you're not going to get this whole film being, taken up by modern production companies because this would just be too much and too much of a risk. It's a huge risk.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for how long the production would be and how much it would invariably cost today to do so much of it practically.
Yeah, and the more we talk about this, the more I'm like, you know what? I think Stanley Kubrick did film the moon landing because that's the only reason why anyone would have funded him doing Space Odyssey.
He did Space Odyssey years before the moon landing.
No, wasn't the moon landing 59 or was it
69.
69? Oh,
69.
okay. Okay.
We're, we're,
Well,
we're, we're getting into wild conspiracy territory where the moon landing was filmed 10 years before it happened, years before we put anything into space.
Well, Stanley Kubrick conceivably could have filmed the moon landing in like 65, and then they directed and produced Space Odyssey in 66, 67, and then they decided to, coincide the moon landing film release with, some Soviet thing.
Okay, I'll believe it. So what we learned today is Stanley Kubrick is everything anybody's ever claimed him to be. He's the man, the myth, the legend, the eccentric art director who has the power to change human history and events at his whim.
Indeed.
And I guess with that, we're gonna thank everyone for listening this week, and thanks for sticking through our October spooktacular.
Yeah, so give this a like, subscribe. It helps us out. Make a comment about whether or not you think Stanley Kubrick did film the moon landing. I'm interested to see where y'all fall on that spectrum. Let me know your bathroom preferences as well, as far as color and design go. I don't care about who you want to be allowed in them. Do not talk about that. So we are planning a pretty exciting new theme for our next theme. Do we want to give a little taste of that now, or are we
Yes,
keeping that under wraps?
yes, let's tell them now so our audience can hold us to it.
Yeah, so our next theme is going to be the War on Christmas.
Yes, we're gonna do a bunch of war movies, and probably a big pinnacle of that is going to be Ridley Scott's Napoleon that comes out next month in November.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. I'm going to be in Italy when it comes out, so that's kind of exciting in that like I'm kind of doing Napoleon-esque things, exploring a new country and you know, I don't know, maybe I'll find a cannon to shoot or something
That would
while
be
I'm there,
badass.
right? I mean, I'm sure they have, cannons that you can shoot. It might cost some money, but maybe I'll make it happen. Um Yeah, I have always been a big war movie person. Our family always has, probably more than like spooky horror movies.
Oh,
Have we
definitely.
watched war movies? So,
Which are far more horrifying.
really, really, for sure. Like, it took Dad a good 30 minutes into Saving Private Ryan before he turned to his 9-year-old daughter and said, maybe you shouldn't be watching this. And 30 minutes is too late
No,
in that
you've already
particular
gotten
film.
through most of D-Day.
Yeah, it gets easier after that, honestly. Yeah. So I'm excited to review some more movies with you, and maybe we'll rope that in on something. So comment down below your favorite war movies, and we'll try to fit them in. I have actually been researching, because I wanted to make sure that there would be enough and we would have enough variety and we wouldn't like hit all the big ones right
Right.
away. And there are a lot of war movies that I haven't seen that I'm actually pretty excited about. So that's
Cool.
exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm excited.
Cool. Okie dokes. Well, thanks for sticking with us and listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.